Well, I'd like to thank Robert for arranging this lecture by Dr. Zarni. It's not often that we have somebody from Southeast Asia appearing here. We tend to have a Northeast Asia focus, and so I badger Robert from time to time. So I felt, well, since I've asked him to do it, I decided I'd also be the MC of tonight's event. And you know, many of you might know Maung Zarni. He is exiled in the United Kingdom, and he is a Burmese Buddhist human rights campaigner. He's the author of Life Under the Boot, 50 Years of Military Dictatorship in Burma. He also blogs and publishes on the Rohingya, and he helped found the Free Rohingya Coalition. And he also is the co-founder of the Free Burma Coalition. And he's a man of principle. He resigned from the University of Brunei Darussalam because they tried to censor his work. He was censored, I think, related to his participation in a roundtable with Aung San Suu Kyi in London, and his university was unhappy about his participation and told him to keep quiet his affiliation, and I guess they made him pay his own transport in the end. At the time when he was resigned, sort of under pressure, the Malaysia's leader in waiting, Anwar Ibrahim, he tweeted, "Let the world know about the resignation of Dr. Maung Zarni." In 2015, he was awarded the Cultivation of Harmony Award by the world's interfaith organization, the Parliament of the World's Religions. So he's a distinguished scholar, an activist, and I'm very happy that he's going to be appearing here this evening. And I guess, there he is, in front of me, please.
Good evening. I'm very happy to be here. I was here 30 years ago as a young student. This was at the time when the country exploded into what later came to be known as 88 uprising, call it like, 8888. And I was on a tourist visa before I started my university in California. So I was living in Nakaochiai, working illegally at different restaurants, cleaning dishes. This is the very first time I came back to Tokyo. So I was feeling quite nostalgic. I mean, tonight's subject is very grim, and I'm not going to mince words, because earlier we were having a little sandwich and, chatting in the upstairs room, and Professor Kingston was describing his conversation or interview with the Nyanasara, the Sri Lanka or Sinhalese equivalent of Viratu, who was honored by Time magazine with a Facebook, front page cover story. And he described Nyanasara as, militant Buddhist. And so my Rohingya friend said, this one is a militant scholar. And so I've got so many names. Some of the my own fellow Burmese Buddhists call me, mercenary mouth, national traitor. I mean, all kinds of honors that one can expect from any country that commits genocide. So as a Burmese and Buddhist, I'd rather be known as a national traitor. And I don't buy this, my country right or wrong. When my country is wrong, it is wrong. Yeah? And because my parents and my own community, and I would say like the general Burmese society had done a good job, because at least like they produced a Buddhist activist that say our society is committing unspeakable crimes against vulnerable minority population. And one of the, I've put together some slides, and I might not stick with every single one, but what I want to say from the outset is that genocides are not conflicts. The first thing we need to get it to those lay people who don't specialize in genocides, or journalists who write about the issue, have not done proper homework. They describe the situation as a conflict. The Rohingyas do not have a conflict with anybody. Yeah? And they have had history of armed resistance. They have had attempts to secede from the Union. But that was a norm. That was a norm. Because upon independence from Burma, a lot of minorities felt, these are minorities, including Buddhist Rakhine's, Buddhist Shan, Buddhist Karens, not just like Christians and Muslims. They felt that independence from Britain was simply being released from the clutch of the white man that came far away to colonize Burma and rule it for 124 years. So that was for them, independence was experienced, or at least perceived, as a release from one clutch of colonialism into another clutch of colonialism. And only this time, it was, their neighbors, their friends. So from the white colonialism to Buddhist chauvinistic, ethnically dominant Burmese brown colonialism. Yeah, that was what triggered. That was the genesis of all the conflicts in today's Burma. And so I want to make it very clear. Genocides are not conflicts. If what is happening in today's Rakhine is a conflict between Rohingyas and Rakhine horizontally, and the Rohingyas and the Burmese ethnicity-controlled government and the military. Then the Jews and other Nazi victims who perished or escaped the Nazi-occupied Europe had conflict with the Nazi party. No one would say the Jews had a conflict with the Nazi party. Yeah? So genocides are essentially state-directed, coordinated, plan to essentially destroy, not simply kill, to destroy a national community by a state that defines itself biologically. Yeah? And Buddhism, and like that for the Burmese, if you're not a Buddhist, you're not Burmese. Yeah? To be Burmese is to be Buddhist. And then the same ideology, conflating faith and ethnicity and national identity, can be found in another or another racist, genocidal political state, Sri Lanka. We know what happened to the Elam Tamil. There are different Tamils. The Tamils who wanted self-determination, they call themselves Elam Tamil. I gave the title of this talk, why are Burmese Buddhists persecuting the Rohingya? It's not simply because Muslims. Because Rohingyas, of all the 16 or so different Muslim communities that are scattered across different regions of Burma. In fact, the Rohingyas are the largest and the only Muslim community that have northern Rakhine or Arakan state of western Burma as their ancestral homeland. They could prove it with primary historical documentation. They can prove it using official post-independence union government documentations. Yeah? So we have a case where the military, the political leadership of Aung San Suu Kyi, the Buddhist Sangha, or the order, the monks and nuns, the intellectuals, the intelligentsia, journalists, writers, cartoonists, and the lay public of different classes and people from all walks of life, blatantly butcher the facts and believe the myths. And these myths enable them to frame the Rohingyas as viruses, illegal migrants, Muslim invaders, land thieves, rapists. Yeah? And so the same way, if you look at every single genocide, you will find this kind of construction of the targeted group, be they Jews or Bosniaks or Tutsis or Khmer or any genocidal situation. Entire populations are framed in such dehumanizing genocidal discourses. So the key here is the perpetrators do not feel guilty, because in their twisted rationalization and self-justification, the killers see themselves as not sinners or not killers. They see themselves as defenders of faith, defenders of the nation, defenders of Buddhist way of life, yeah, and preservers of the Buddhist character of the Buddhist nation. Yeah. So this is actually counterfactual. Perpetrators do not see themselves as wrongdoers. That is why there is such an irreconcilable gap between the overwhelmingly popular domestic public opinion inside Burma, all the way from Aung San Suu Kyi, all the way down to the rickshaw drivers or like taxi drivers. They just cannot understand what the fuss is, all about. They are defending their faith. They are defending their society. They are defending their way of life. Yeah? So all it takes is a single step towards constructing the Rohingya as a threat to national security. But for the military that came to power in 1962, they adopted, the leadership adopted xenophobia and racism, most particularly anti-Muslim or Islamophobia. Before the word Islamophobia came into wider circulation, since say like 9/11, the Burmese military was well on its way to institutionalize anti-Muslim racism. And there were two reasons. One was the Burmese economy at the time of the military coup in 1962 was primarily in the hands of people of Indian descent, people of Indian origin, and to a lesser extent, some Sino-Burmese. Because we developed such strong, Buddhist-centered national identity, anything that looked and sounded foreign to us was to be rejected. And xenophobia also has a political dimension, because parliamentary democratic system, that was what the nationalists envisioned. That was what they fought, and that was what they adopted. That system of electoral government was deemed alien to the Burmese Buddhist political tradition and our political culture. So one was like rejection of all things, foreign. The truth is that Buddhism is as foreign to Burma as, Toyota cars or computers, because Buddha was from northern India. And if you take the Indian element out of Burmese culture, we will be left with nothing, not even longi. What we wore is longi. We call longi. That's a word, the Hindi word like lungi. If you go to some parts of India or Bangladesh, you will see similar attire. And so in 1962, the military leadership did two things. One was to nationalize the economy, meaning they wanted to take control, take back. That's a popular word in Britain and also in USA. We've got to take back control of our country. And the similar rhetoric was used to justify the military's policies that were underpinned by racism. So this did not happen only 5 years ago or last year. Racism was one of the institutional pillars of the Burmese governance structures. As well, the military has institutionalized anti-Muslim racism, anti-Chinese racism, and two things that it did was pauperize the commercial class of Burmese with Indian or Chinese or Eurasian origin. Before Idi Amin drove out thousands of Indians in Africa, we were 10 years, Ne Win was 10 years, the General Ne Win was 10 years ahead of Idi Amin. So that's why, if you read Glass Palace by Amitav Ghosh, he talked about thousands, hundreds of thousands of Indians overnight became paupers and left the country. Yeah? And then after 300,000 Indians of commercial classes fled the country or left the country because they had nothing left. If you employed 5 people and run a little cafe or roti shop, you are considered bourgeoisie, and so the state had to take control of your property, and you are given nothing. And so the military turned its attention to the Rohingya around 1965. 64, 65, the military brought in Economic Nationalization Act under the banner of radical socialism. And there was at the time this ethnic triangle. And to take one step back to understand the situation in a proper context, Burma was a cluster of different Buddhist nations or kingdoms, and Rakhine was the last Buddhist kingdom that failed to the Burmese invasion. And at the time of, let's say, French Revolution, there were Muslims, there were Rakhine Buddhist communities. They were all known as Arakhanis, and they had their own little ethnic enclaves. But at the same time, there were interactions. Yeah? They were not at each other's throat. After the Burmese annexed Arakan or Rakhine, Muslims and Buddhists of Arakhanis were residents of Arakan, irrespective of their faiths. They team up against their common enemy. That is us, the Buddhists from the dry zone, that came and snatched the Arakan and dismantled the Arakan kingdom and took their most sacred image. And, Jeff knows, go to Mandalay, there was a famous Buddha image of Mahamuni, the great image. And that the Rakhines still did not, or have not replaced the Buddha image from, taken from Ra'u in the original place, that they did not replace with anything of, significance, just to keep the historical memory that this is what the Burmese in the central Burma had done to them. This is a Buddhist killing and destroying other Buddhists. Yeah. And so at the time of independence, the very first ethnic rebellions came from Rakhine State, not Karans. Popularly, a lot of scholars and journalists talk about the Karans as the first that rose up in, say, like 1949. But there were two parallel armed movements in Western Burma, the state of like Arakan or Rakhine. One was the Mujahideens, who wanted to, it's a radical segment of a Rohingya community that felt that they would be better off if they join up with East Pakistan, today's Bangladesh, since 1971. And there was Rakhine independence movement. Yeah. In fact, the day Burma, or the Burmese nationalists, were celebrating the power transfer or independence ceremony in Rangoon, January 4th, 1948, a small division of Burma army was fighting two front wars in Arakan state, one against the Mujahideens, the other against the Buddhist Rakhine nationalists. So, because at the time Burma army was also suffering from the internal division between the Burmese communists, who were in the rank and file, and the rightists and nationalists, the army could not afford to continue fighting two front wars. So they made peace with the Rohingyas. And by 1961, Rohingya, in quotes, insurrections or insurgency was finished. Yeah? And in the exchange for, the Rohingyas were granted full and equal citizenship rights. They were promised non-discriminatory policies. Their ethnicity was recognized officially in the encyclopedia published by the Union of Burma government in 1964 as an integral ethnic nationality with their own ancestral land across from the then East Pakistan. Yeah. And so these are the promises, and these were the official agreements that Burma political and military leadership had given the Rohingya. Yeah. And then, after they made peace with the Rohingyas, the Burmese went after the Rakhines, because the Rakhine Buddhists posed, in fact, a greater threat, because they were the Rakhines among Burma, among us. The Rakhines are known as the staunchest nationalists. Of course, they were the last to lose their sovereignty to us, And then now that the British had left, only the Burmese emerged as the dominant colonizer. And so there is a triangular politics. So the center that was controlled by the military play the two communities against each other, because we could not, from a strategic perspective, afford to have these two communities to cooperate and live in harmony. well into 1970s. If you ask Rakhine nationalists who they hate more, they would say the Burmese, not the Muslims, not the Rohingyas. Yeah? So let me just show a few things here, and then I'll wrap up. And the other thing is the strategic nature of the Arakan coastline. Yeah? And this is where, this is basically this should be World Heritage Sites, killing fields. This is where almost 400 villages were burned to the ground, now being bulldozed, being primed for commercial development, special economic zone, not plutonium, the titanium and other minerals are found to be there. The Chinese companies were given concessions. And this is where the largest, one of the 10 largest natural gas deposits lie, the Bay of Bengal in the Andaman Sea. And there are about like 14 or so different countries operating there. South Korea, Malaysia, Japan, Norway, Australia, you name it, or France. And also, this is also the one of the only two access points for China to reach Indian Ocean. If you look at South China Sea, from Japan all the way down to Malaysia, it's, to use a chess analogy, China's navy is basically checkmated there. There's a long string of U.S. Strategic allies or very U.S.-friendly countries that will allow U.S. Navy to either have their bases or come in and dock their warships. So the Chinese, Beijing wanted this area and actually considered this area an integral piece of its long-term strategy. Yeah? And there's also natural gas and oil twin pipeline. Yeah? Gas pumped out of this area, oil coming from the Sea of Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, and other places. And the tankers would land off the coast of Arakan, and then oil would be transported across from here to Kunming. Yeah? That is integral to China's even development, to spread development to the western interior provinces, because uneven development threatens the Chinese Communist Party in terms of potential social and economic disruptions. And also, like, if China can freely access this area, it can cut about 4,000 kilometers of transport lanes. Doesn't have to go through the narrow Strait of Malacca, and also that strait is also considered vulnerable in the event of any military conflict with the United States and ally. That could be blockaded. So this is such a crucial area for China. Because it is crucial to China, it becomes important to India, it becomes important to United States, it becomes important to Japan. If you look at the Sri Lankan conflict, like LTTE, the Tamils, and the Sinhalese majority Colombo government, you see similar geoeconomic and geostrategic equation. Yeah? LTTE was crushed not simply by the state of Sri Lanka. It was crushed in that strategic equation. 1 year on, no one has done anything substantive, effective, to put a stop to the atrocities. and that the atrocity crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the genocide, they are ongoing. Yeah? And the reason I call this, my actually colleague and wife, we call it slow burning genocide, because the popular misperception is if a case of atrocities is to be considered genocide, it has to reach the level of Auschwitz or like Rwanda or Bosnia, mass killings. The SS was gassing the Jews and other victims like 5,000 per half an hour. That was the rate, towards the end. So people did not see that number. Actually, even academics laugh at anyone who used the word genocide to describe it. But mass killings is only one of 5 legally defined acts of genocide. But if you take the genocide and in the way its original inventor of the word genocide, Raphael Lemkin, framed it, genocide is actually a process designed to destroy an entire population, group, from its spiritual, cultural, intellectual, biological, commercial, and last but not least, physical foundations. So my final comment would be the structures of genocidal repression have been put in place since 1978. Yeah? Doctor-patient ratio for the Rohingya, for the 2 towns, is 1 doctor is to 160,000 Rohingyas, as compared with 1 doctor is to 1,000 or 2,000 for the rest of the country. Yeah? Malnutrition rate for 85,000 surveyed Rohingya children under the age of 5 are semi-famine, sub-Saharan-like conditions in a region that is so fertile. Yeah? And this was one of the regions that had earned the British Burma the name Rice Bowl of Asia or the world. And then we have famine-like conditions there. 80% of the Rohingya adults, men and women, are illiterate. I interviewed them in Rohingya camps in Bangladesh, illiterate. In a country that won UN's award for combating illiteracy. Burma has a very high literacy rate, after Japan and South Korea and Catholic Philippines. And the villages they live, the term village is misleading because from the perspective of the Burmese military, these are not villages. They are security grids. A pregnant Rohingya woman will have to go through, on average, 3 to 4 military checkpoints to get to the next village where there might be a midwife with no medicine or no facilities. Yeah? So we have a situation that is worse than Gaza and West Bank. There are 2 million people in West Bank. They could still move about within their own, if you want to call it open prison. But they have to go through the checkpoints to get to the Israeli territory to pick, fruit or do other work. But in this case, Rohingyas cannot move from point A to point B without being harassed, intimidated, or being arbitrarily arrested. And finally, this severe restriction on the freedom of movement directly impact their ability to access what Amartya Sen called nutritional opportunities or sources. They cannot go to the creeks or rivers or the forest to get vegetations and others. So in this scenario, that they have been forced to live under, there have been waves of fleeing, either by, because of the direct violence or because of this genocidal conditions. There have been waves. Today, there are 4 or 5 times more Rohingyas outside the country than inside their homeland. So that is why I am less concerned about direct violence, but more concerned about the fact that there is a system designed to destroy them slowly. This is a genocide, and this is happening before our eyes. And then so, never again, that has become a slogan, but it must not be mocked by the fact that because of the geopolitical powers and their competition and rivalries, we must not allow this entire population to be sacrificed as if life did not matter for the Rohingya. Thank you.
Moderator, I just want to get the first question in. We've heard a lot about how ARSA precipitated the ethnic cleansing that began last August. What do you know about ARSA, and what do you hear about what they're doing now? And when you come to the microphone, when you're identified, please identify yourself and ask a short question, not a long commentary. Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, I'll stand now, because I've been sitting in different places. ARSA, some of you may not know, is known as Arakan Rohingya National, Salvation Army. And, I'm not a specialist on, the organizations that may be labeled terrorist or armed, but I would say this. If you look at the structures of oppression and waves of violence that were coordinated periodically since 1978, let's just assume that members of the ARSA are in their 30s and 40s, the hardcore ones, not those who were coerced into or that later feel persuaded to join in. When the Burmese designed this genocide, these men weren't even born. So how could an organization and men who weren't born, when the structures of repression were put in place by the Burmese, be the precipitator of this design? And secondly, if you look at the Burmese government's own description of what ARSA was or what ARSA is and what it has done, the Burmese military claimed, and a lot of media organizations and the national governments, UN member states, who also repeated the military's, even including Amnesty International and all like International Crisis Group, say ARSA launched coordinated attacks in 30 different locations in the morning of 25th August. I've been a grassroots community organizer. Try organizing a protest in front of an embassy or three different countries, just non-violent, peaceful protest. The amount of work that is required and the kind of like a strategic thinking that's required, and to have anything coordinated that rivals something that only an organization like Mossad, the Israeli intelligence, could pull it off. And these were men, 80% of them are illiterate, many of them did not have shoes, a lot of them carried farm equipment. If you mathematically think about it, if an armed organization, primitively armed, attacked 30 different police outposts and only managed to kill 10 policemen, that was a complete failure. On average, you will want to see, if you're involved in it, at least 60, enemies. But so what we don't hear is the military planning months ahead, airlifting special divisions to the area, taking down fences of Rohingya homes, confiscating even farm tools like swords and machetes from Rohingya men and families. That created a massive paranoia. And then evacuating only Buddhist communities from that area. So everyone who had lived there, who had undergone or who have experienced past military violence and operation, they knew something was coming. Yeah? It triggered some panic run among the Rohingya people. Yeah? So I think all of these preparations have been done several months before ASA allegedly attacked the outpost. This is, to my own opinion, is that there are also ex-U.S. Army Special Force operatives that have been supporting the Korans and whatnot. They have gone to Rohingya camps in Bangladesh, met up with people who presented themselves as ASA representative. The United States invented the global war on terror, and U.S. intelligence agencies, U.S. ex-Special Force and other military personnel, they have dismissed this Burmese official claim that it was ASA who precipitated it. So the European Union and other entities have said, well, the military responded, disproportionately, with the disproportionate use of violence. So because the military has been trying to align its discourse and the rationalization with the larger rationale that drives the war on terror. So they're trying to get on the bandwagon. And in fact, by all indications, no one's buying it. If the United States, the intelligence agencies, State Department officials, and former military personnel are dismissing this tale, there is no taker. This is just complete excuse. Often, some of us even think that these attacks may be even staged by the military. Hitler's army staged the attack on a border post with Poland, wearing the Polish military uniforms, using the German criminals, promising them the reduced sentences of freedom, and then the Nazi regime used the Germans to attack the Nazi outpost and then blame it on Poland. And this kind of thing, this isn't done simply by Nazis or the Burmese. When JFK was in office, Arthur Schlesinger Jr., he was one of the advisors. Yeah? And they were brainstorming ideas about how to bring Castro down. And one idea that was entertained at the White House National Security Council discussion. This emerged years later in the New York Times. One idea was to sink a U.S. warship near Cuban water and then blame it on Castro and then invade. And later, like they did the Bay of Pig operation. But categorically, I don't buy this discourse that Rohingyas, militants, brought all of this onto their own people. No.
Hello, I'm Mai. And I'm wondering what you think, or how you think that the Rohingya situation affects the Japan-Myanmar relationship, and especially in regard to how Abe reacted during the bilateral meeting at the Mekong Summit.
You know, the Japan is considered, in fact, the special friend, not just a special friend, you know, the special friend of Burma. To start with, the Burmese armed forces were patronized, funded, trained, and founded by the Japanese naval intelligence. Yeah? And General Ne Win, who ruled the country, in fact, as a commander-in-chief, you know, if we take that position, he had been commander-in-chief of the armed forces since February 1949 until July 1988, yeah, when he officially resigned but informally retained the reins of the power for a number of years. Yeah. Ne Win was trained at Nakanoku. Nakanoku Military Intelligence School. Yeah. So I was reading a book by one of the young Burmese scholars who was sent here as part of the war reparation package that the Japanese government post-World War II offered the Burmese. By the way, I think we received the largest sum of reparation, and we were the first ever country to receive such package from Japan. So and every single time the Burmese regime faces crisis, Japan has come to its rescue, whatever the nature of the regime. But unfortunately, over the last 56 years, we have had this, you know, extremely repressive regime that is proven capable of committing a genocide against one of its own national minorities. You know, not to mention the on-again, off-again civil war against different ethnic groups along Chinese and Thai Burmese border areas. So, I mean, Abe, well, you know Abe government's ideological orientation. And this is a government that attempts to, you know, change the Article 9, you know, rearm Japan and do away with, you know, all the checks and balances, and basically, you know, the peace framework that was put in place, you know, when General MacArthur was here. Also, like a reason, I think it obviously, I mean, the official recognition, not by activists, or not by activist scholars, or not by any human rights organizations, by the United Nations. Yeah? UN recognized officially in an unprecedented manner, without having gone through the so-called judicial process, judicial review, because what the Burmese government has been doing, not just like violent expulsion, the crime of deportation, as ICC prosecutor's office call it. The UN fact-finding mission identify exactly the things that I was talking this evening. Structures and institutions of repression that are of genocidal nature. Yeah? This is coming from the United Nations officially. Tomorrow, the Security Council will hear directly from the head of the fact-finding mission, former Indonesian Attorney General Marzuki. Yeah? And 9 countries on the council requested the meeting, and China and Russia could not veto this. And so that's scheduled tomorrow. So despite world's opinion, not just like Western governments, yeah, Asian, African government, and Latin American governments like Peru, and the Middle Eastern government, including like Kuwait, they recognize Burma is committing a textbook example not of ethnic cleansing, but of genocide. And Japan is, in fact, shaming itself in the eyes of the world. When the whole world considered this, based on the strength of the overwhelming evidence that Burma today, in the 21st century, is committing the very first genocide. And Japan poo-poo any accusations. And Suu Kyi was here telling the investors that investment climate is going to improve, so let's just keep the business as usual. Yeah? And then the Japanese ambassador based in Yangon, just last week or a few days ago, said, punishment in the form of sanctions against the perpetrator, Burma, my own country, is utter nonsense. I mean, unbelievable. The kind of things that come out of Japanese officials and political leaders in the face of an irrefutable genocide is utterly unacceptable, is ignoble. Yeah? I think those people, the officials and the leaders, they should be ashamed. It's one thing that Japan does not apologize, has not come to terms with its own fascist war crimes committed 70 years ago. I was just in Seoul. There were comfort women in their 90s protesting in front of Japanese embassy every day. They're not asking for anything. They want recognition that they have been wrong. One thing that Japan does not have the strength to own its past. Another thing, it is entirely another thing that Japan, I find, is complicit, actively complicit, not just simply bystanding in whitewashing Aung San Suu Kyi and Japanese-trained Burmese military's crime of all crimes, the genocide. So that is my view. And I'm speaking as a Buddhist, as a Burmese, here. I think, the Japanese government ought to review its policies. It should put moratorium on any aid except emergency and humanitarian assistance to Burma. Japan policy is driven by corporate interest of Japanese corporations and its attempt to undermine China's place within the Burmese geo-economic context. And it isn't driven by any love of, any Burmese for that matter, not just the Rohingyas in Burma. And I think, I say this publicly.
Von Renzel, I live near here. Just a quick remark. You've been talking for an hour. You have not convinced me that ethnic cleansing and genocide is the same thing. What you've been describing is ethnic cleansing. Genocide I would use for something like the Nazi genocide of the Jews, the Rwanda genocide of the Hutus, or the Turkish genocide of the Armenians. That is when total populations are murdered. What you've been describing is ethnic cleansing. But that was just my opinion. About the solving the problem that you describe, you seem to implicate that if Burma adapts the Rohingya identity and language as part of one of these nationalities or ethnicities, except in the Burmese constitution, that problem would go away. I don't really see that because I don't see precedents for a large Islamic population in a non-Islamic society being integrated. Look at Philippines, Mindanao, look at Thailand, Patani, look at India, how Pakistan was created, look at China, the Uyghurs. So my question to you is, would it not be a more realistic suggestion to redraw the borders and give northern Lakrina state to Bangladesh? Because then the Rohingyas, they could live in a country that is Muslim, speaks their language, speaks Bengali, and actually that was, if you look at history, I just found this out today, they were promised that during World War II, when the Buddhists aligned with Japan and the Rohingyas aligned with the British, and the British actually made that promise to create their ethnic Bengali Muslim state-led. in that area? That's my question about that idea.
Two things. I don't use the word ethnic cleansing because this came out of the Yugoslavia or Serbian genocide of the Bosniaks, because ethnic cleansing, from the perspective of genocide scholars, is a bleaching of ethnic cleansing. Actually, is benign because in the original context, ethnic cleansing compared to genocide, ethnic cleansing mean like the geographic area is cleansed of a particular ethnic group, and then you made you even like provide transportation to move them somewhere else. Yeah. So it's like the justification for doing that, population transfer was that this way the two populations in conflict scenario would no longer be at each other's throat. The reason I chose to describe structures of repression, is to establish the genocidal intent, not only from the public pronouncements coming from the leaders of different pillars of society, monks, generals, and intellectuals. Yeah? Like the commander-in-chief called the presence of Rohingya as unfinished business from the Second World War. Yeah? So genocide to them is a finished business. What a finished business would look like. If you pinch yourself, you will feel the pain. Try fasting for a few days. You would start to feel the pain. Yeah? When you deny a population access to adequate nutritional sources, when you block them from accessing emergency, preventative, and prenatal care, when you allow any state entity, police, and other law enforcement agencies to do anything they want with Rohingya bodies, rape, slaughter, use them as forced laborer, jail them, summarily execute them, you have blanket impunity. When you have 40 years of a pattern of direct violence, policies that put in place that can only be interpreted as essentially unplugging life sources to sustain the community. Rohingyas are killed not because the soldiers know every single one of them. Rohingyas are killed because they have a membership in the ethnic group that is identified as an enemy of Myanmar. When you are attacked, not because of John or, like a Mike or whatever, because of your white skin. When that is instituted as a matter of policy, it meets the definition of Lemkin's genocide. Yeah? This was like 1942. Classic. This is a classic definition of genocide. Yeah. And so in terms of World War II, what the British promised a lot of things to a lot of people and honor none of it. Look at what's happening in Palestine. Protectorate, Is Britain today protecting anybody? If anything, Britain is not even protecting its own self-interest. Look at Brexit. I mean, I live in England. So no, I totally disagree. And in terms of what needs to be done as a viable solution, I think, I'll say this for the record, Rohingya cannot live in Burma without some form of international protection. We have 4 pillars of the society and the whole country, as the Burmese majority see it. The armed forces, the most powerful institution, all the political parties, not just Suu Kyi and the NLD, the entire Buddhist community, the Sangha, the order, the public, And the ideological class of artists, cartoonists, you know, the journalists, overwhelming majority of these pillars of Burma said, we don't want these niggers. You know, we call them Kala. That's like, you know, the N-word in the West.
So
And
you
so
agree,
how's it?
redraw the borders.
Pardon?
So you agree, redraw the borders would work.
Whatever it takes for 1 million people to have a place of earth. We take this ground for granted. They do not. They cannot. They cannot. Rohingyas in Bangladeshi camps, they are in a less evil prisons, but nonetheless, those are prisons. They cannot freely move from one camp to another. There are 35 different camps. Yeah? And so, is it too much for Rohingyas to say they want a piece of earth so that they could go to toilet freely? Or, you know, raise their chickens? Or have a plot of land to grow rice for their children? Is it too much?
My name is Pio D'Emilia. I'm a correspondent for Sky TV, Italian TV in the East Asia. I've been there several times. I've been even recently in the Coast Bazaar, so I know a little bit about the situation now. Since you are not a Rohingya, maybe it's even more important what you can tell us as just a Burmese Buddhist about faith, or maybe it was not, after all, an about face of Madame Aung San Suu Kyi. I know that you have spoken at several places. I know you met some Nobel laureates like Miriam Maguire that have officially asked about the challenged Aung San Suu Kyi, and they asked the Nobel Foundation to how do you say in English, to withdraw the unprecedentedly, I would say, the Nobel Prize. What can you tell us about her? What are the motives? What are the reasons? I mean, you know better than me. Many people say that she's not going to face against the military again. She's just strategically behaving. I mean, can you say something of this? And the other thing is, if you have any news, recent news about the killing of Koni, his Muslim lawyer. He was also not a Rohingya, but he was Muslim. And as far as I know, she didn't attend even the funerals. Can you tell us, the family is now in very big danger. They want to leave the country and they can't.
Yeah. Thanks for both questions. With respect to Aung San Suu Kyi and her, you know, inexcusable behavior, actually, her own father and my great uncle, my mother's uncle, they were classmates, friends, and next door roommates, yeah, at Rangoon universities in their teens in the 1930s. So when I left the country, I didn't leave the country because I was involved in political activities. I left the country because I hated the military, and I was working as a tourist, and I had an opportunity to go to US because a few American families decided that when I said I wanted to study in the US, and I had the, the merits to go, but I didn't have the means, they decided that I was worthy of their help, and so they sponsored me, so I ended up in California. When I left the country, I had three things in my pocket, yeah? Wallet size. One was this like little Buddha image picture from Mandalay. My family was from, my parents were devout Buddhists, so my father had this, little Buddha picture laminated. On the back of it were like some loving kindness prayers or something that he thought would protect his son. And then the other was my own family's picture. I came from a huge family of 8 children and 2 parents. And the third was the picture, a black and white picture of Aung San family. Yeah? Aung San Suu Kyi was barely two. The father was holding her in his arm, and then two other boys, her brothers, and her mom. So 5 of them. So this is also the woman that inspired me to basically do human rights activism as a young student in California, openly. I was like, oh my God, this woman is so privileged, and yet, like, she chose to do this activism for the people and for the country. What was I doing in California, sitting in a cozy library in university campus, and I must do something. And then plus students were like being gunned down. So I supported Aung San Suu Kyi for 15 years as a foot soldier. I studied every single pronouncement she made in, in writing or in video speeches in different languages. I studied her father. He was, and he is a role model, considered a role model by millions of young Burmese men, different generations, or at least my generation. And so when I discovered, essentially, around 2004, that she was not cut to lead the country, against the entire collective opinion of Burmese opposition, I came out and said, we must work with the generals. She is not going to provide the leadership. And that was, the first experience of me vilified, not by the whole nation. There were people who agreed that, we need to work with the generals. And Suu Kyi is failing. This was 2004, 15 years ago. But the entire opposition at the time basically symbolically lynched me, vilified me. And now it's like the entire nation. Now, with respect to why does she behave the way she behaves? She is not silent. She is not silent. Every time she opens her mouth, it is to whitewash, dismiss, and deny that genocide is being committed. So the media keeps misportraying Aung San Suu Kyi's position. Well, Ms. Suu Kyi has been silent. No. Every single time she says anything about this issue, her words support the military. The logic, in my view, is A, and most importantly, she is racist herself. She is racist towards Muslims. She is racist towards non-Buddhist minorities. Back in the 1970s, there was a letter, a copy of which I have in my possession, and it's also in the public domain. Her godfather, by the name of Lord Gorbooth, who was the Secretary of State for India, and a friend of Aung San Suu Kyi family. And this was the man and his family who helped Suu Kyi to come to Oxford. And she spent Christmases and New Year's at his house, and that's where she met her late husband, Michael Ayres. So basically, this father figure wrote a letter to one of the high Foreign Office officials identifying Suu Kyi as anti-Shan. He didn't use the word racist. You cannot be. I can criticize Japan and its policies. I cannot say Japanese are this. I cannot say Indians are this or I am opposed to China's imperialism, but I am not against the Chinese. I'm opposed to the state of Israel. I have done nothing that would merit accusing me of anti-Semitic. You see what I'm saying? So that gentleman, the man that loved Suu Kyi as a father figure, essentially described her as a racist. This was in the 1970s. And then on Radio 4, BBC, that's the premier, the flagship radio program. In her interview in October 2013 with Michelle Hussein, one of the most respected Pakistani British journalists, she was essentially explaining and rationalizing why Buddhists might be afraid of Muslims. And, she was pressed by Michelle that, will you say that you condemn the violence against Rohingya Muslims? And she said, well, I am against all kinds of violence. No. I want you to say that, I want you to know if you would condemn the violence against Rohingya Muslims specifically. Well, there is a global perception that there is a rise of Muslim power around the world, and we in Burma also have that perception. Yeah, she evaded, for a simple issue. And then finally, let me say this: I think I was a military cadet, at the age of 16. Since the country's army, the army's founding in 1941 December, every third male in my family has been in the military. Different ranks, some very prominent, others low ranks. Yeah? When I met her in London School of Economics, I didn't have a lot of time, so I wrote a short typewritten note for her. Only one point: Auntie, you cannot work with these generals. They don't respect you, they don't trust you, they will not do business with you. Because I have dealt with the generals, and some of them are my old mates, or people that I work with, including the people in the presidential office or in the commander-in-chief's office. I said, they hate you, they will not work with you. You cannot do business with them. This was 2012. But I think because she feels that she is the general's daughter, yeah, she thinks that because her father founded this army, all the military officers, particularly the top brass, were her brothers. She calls them. So she said it repeatedly and publicly. I have genuine affection for the army. Well, you cannot simply feel affectionate towards an institution simply because your father was the figurehead of, the institution. Particularly when the army is credibly accused of committing gravest international crimes. And so, but she deludes herself into thinking that her father's standing with the army and her attempts to conciliate with the generals and her attempts to warm the generals' heart will make the generals change their strategic equation. It doesn't matter. Just like today or yesterday, Australia announced that they would impose sanctions against 5 or 6 generals. No, it's not individual generals. It is the institution that has institutionalized the genocidal policies. Hitler committed suicide. If Nazi Germany had gone on for another 2 years, they would have continued with Hitler's policies. It doesn't matter. Even if you pick up the commander-in-chief and haul him to The Hague, it does not matter. That is why the trajectory Aung San Suu Kyi has pursued has destroyed her, standing with the world. Think about her strategic capacity, this woman's capacity. Think about it. She was Asian Mandela. She could walk on water in the eyes of the global public. From that to, I can be condemned for a lot of things, a political mistake I made, but I'm not in the ditch. Yeah? She is digging a hole. She will never come back from that ditch, because she keeps on convincing herself this twisted utilitarian logic that for the happiness and common good of the greatest majority, maybe a minority that are suffering is worth sacrificing. And then she's not accomplishing, she is not getting power. Yeah? She's squandering every single ounce of the world's affection, respect, and reverence for her. Basically, I attempt to write my essays these days without mentioning Aung San Suu Kyi. As far as I'm concerned, she is no more than mouthpiece, very polished mouthpiece for the genocidal killers. She is no longer relevant to the Burmese politics insofar as structures and institutions are concerned. Oh yeah, Coney. That bit, sorry. Kony was the Muslim lawyer who was credited with finding a loophole in the constitution that was written by the military for the military. Yeah? What we have as a constitution is essentially the antithesis of the spirit of constitution. Constitutions are about checks and balances of different institutions within a political context. This constitution puts the military above the society, above any existing national law. This constitution legalizes, a priori, any future military coup. And so this lawyer, Kony, Burmese Muslim, he created the term state counselor. Yeah? And so the advisor, the highest advisor. So her term would parallel with presidential terms, 5 years, 5 years. Yeah? When he was shot dead, as he arrived back from Jakarta, where he discussed with the Indonesian legalists and parliamentarians how sunset clauses were introduced and pursued in the Indonesian transition. Yeah? And so like the Indonesian military would reduce their unelected seats, the quota in the Indonesian parliament. So Kony was trying to do that. When he arrived back in Rangoon at the airport, he was holding his grandson when he was shot point blank. Even the grandson went down. I mean, look at the trauma that kid would have to live with the rest of his life. Yeah, like 3 or 4 years old. The day Kony was shot dead, Aung San Suu Kyi was entertaining Japanese diplomats who brought cherry trees as a symbol of goodwill from our best friend Japan. That was in Naypyidaw. Yeah? This woman is the second most powerful woman after the commander-in-chief. Here is a case where her most loyal Muslim legal advisor was shot dead, holding his grandson in his arm. If I were in her shoes, I would tell the Japanese delegation, can we reschedule our meeting? Yeah? My legal advisor was shot dead. I need to go back to Rangoon as soon as possible. Yeah? They could arrange a special flight. They could fly a chopper. It's a short flight, 1 hour to Rangoon. No. Well, okay, all right, she is very disciplined, has good work ethics, and doesn't want to inconvenience the visiting Japanese officials. Okay, she kept the schedule. Tell her assistant, put me on the phone with Kony's widow. I want to talk to her. She should know better because she was the one who lost her father to assassin's bullet at the age of 18 months. That to me, and it took about a month, an outrage and outcry in the Burmese language, Facebooks, postings, and the media, questioning why Aung San Suu Kyi had not offered any word of condolences to the Kony's family. To me, that speaks volume. This is a woman who is incapable of feeling compassion. Think about it. This relates to the fact that she has not gone to Cox's Bazar to visit, alleged rape victims. Let's just give her that. Yeah, she questioned UN methodology, but Suu Kyi is not known as a established researcher, but she questioned the human rights research methodology. She dismisses the findings. Yeah, okay. If you don't want to believe what other people have to say about these women are saying, as a woman, as a mother, as a widow, she should have flown. Sheikh Hasina, Prime Minister of Bangladesh, has invited her repeatedly. The Foreign Minister, Muhammad Ali, met with her at least 4 times. They all invited her to come and talk to the woman. Yeah? No. Over 1 year, Aung San Suu Kyi has not gone to meet with a single victim of her father's army's genocide. Yeah. I mean, she went to Sitwe after months, and then she went there, not with like sexual violence experts or any other officials that can educate her about, you know, these types of crimes that happen in Bosnia, Central America, Latin America, all over the world. She went there with real estate developers, yeah? Children of cronies, Husky, the helicopter full, businessmen accompanied her. And I used to run like a genocide intensive training program with Burmese monks and nuns as well as writers. I would bring them to Cambodia. I will conduct genocide walking tours in the mass graves. I will facilitate dialogue between the Burmese monks and the Khmer Rouge survivors. And I would also translate for the legal briefing, given by the Khmer Rouge Tribunal legal teams, all the 3 different teams, the defense, prosecution, and civil party, because a lot of monks don't speak English. If you go to like, the Chong Yi in Phnom Penh, there are signs everywhere. Do not smile. Yeah? Don't try to look pretty. You are in a mass grave. Yeah? And yeah. Don't try to do like 300, women and children buried here. You're like, eh. That is precisely what she did. Yeah, she went to this area, making sure that she looked great on camera, smiling, cracking jokes in the area where women and children and elderly people were either like burned alive or driven out in the most brutal fashion. Yeah? I have absolutely no expectation that Aung San Suu Kyi will become part of the solution. That is why, this actually has an impact on, Japan-Myanmar relations. As long as Tokyo hinges its policy on the mirage of Aung San Suu Kyi as a democratic transitional leader, Japan-Myanmar relations, down the road will be written as one of the most, unsavory aspects of international relations. You cannot call a country moving toward democratic transition when journalists attempting to uncover mass graves and report to the world what they found are tried and punished with National Security Act. These are laws that Aung San Suu Kyi's father attempted to fight and run away, run underground. She is using these laws to justify persecution of Rohingyas. Never once has she openly said, I want to see perpetrators of these crimes, whatever the nature, tried either within our court system, or if we are unequipped to provide fair trial, or for lack of crimes against humanity law or mass atrocity law. I want perpetrators of these crimes to be tried in a tribunal or in The Hague. No. Instead, she said, the journalists, no, they can write about anything. But the next thing you know, someone who made derogatory remarks on the Facebook about her or against her, he is hauled into jail for 6 months. These are not genocides, war crimes, crimes against humanity, persecution of journalists, the persecution of land rights protesters and whatnot. Yeah, these are not signs of a country that is moving in any democratic direction. So I should stop.
So we have time for one more short question and one very short answer.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. I'm quite interested in your view of the Rakhine Peace Commission. And also, just another question on there's a huge disparity between the Western rhetoric on the understanding of the Rohingya crisis and the domestic rhetoric. What is your perspective on sort of is there any prospect for changing that, or what needs to be done about that?
Yeah. Please,
We've got to close in a few minutes because we
Yeah.
need to close down the room.
the Peace Commission, these commissions have become, laughing matters insofar as like international diplomats and journalists and others, yeah? There's absolutely no credibility. I know that, the former Japanese ambassador is one of the members of this commission. Every single commission has found nothing. And in fact, the Filipino member of this commission has said, our job is not to hold anyone accountable. Whereas, in the face of a massive allegations and, coming from the United Nations, genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, gravest crimes in international law, are found to be committed by the army, and Aung San Suu Kyi is, complicit in these crimes. And then, her commissioners, both Japanese and Filipino commissioners, come out and say, no, we're not going to hold accountable. If you walk into a shop next door, pick up expensive bottle of Chanel 5, the next thing you know, Japanese police would haul you in. Yeah, the shoplifting, there are consequences. So she is giving them a blank check. In terms of changing the perception gap, of course, that is why I was explaining to you, this is the public that refuse to believe written Burmese official documentation that these people are our own people, yeah, our national minority. If the entire nation or majority of the public refuse to accept the facts, how are you going to change their view? Racists do not change their mind simply because you give them research findings and documentations. Yeah? And Eichmann in Jerusalem, he did not admit that he was guilty. Yeah? He was doing his job. And he said, maybe I am guilty in the eyes of my Creator, but not in the international law, not the laws of humans, you see. So that is why, for after 3 years, having developed this genocide sensitivity program, having given up my academic career to do this work, having brought 120 monks, nuns, and writers to Cambodia and Bangkok to do this work, I give up trying to find solution inside the country. Burmese society has crossed the line. We are, if you come here in 1945, you think that any rational discourse would have changed the Japanese public opinion and their mass buy-in to the militarism? The same way the Nazis in the 30s and 40s would not have been able to change through reconciliation and dialogue. How did Nazi Germany end? How did militarism here end it? Yeah? And that is the way that we are going. And whether or not it actually happens tomorrow or 10 years from now is anyone's guess. But no, there is absolutely no solution inside the country. Once a society reaches or drops so low to the level that the public would cheer the cries of the rape victims and the cries of the babies, then that society has lost the strength to bounce back to the place where decent humans live. I am Burmese. I'm speaking. I know my people. Yeah? I know this military. No, we have crossed the line of return.